What is going on, folks? It is Steiner here with another episode of Secondhand Talent, and we have an incredibly special guest today. But first, thank you so much to Tenacious Toys for sponsoring the show. Thank you for Luke Chu for the Lo-Fi, our choice toy of the season. And thanks to all of you who are listening, reading, watching, wherever in the world you are. We love you. We appreciate you. Now let's get right the fuck to it. This week's guest is, you may have assumed with all of these records around me, it may have to do with this individual. He is the one, the only Blag Dahlia, co-founder of Suburban Nightmare and the Dwarves.
Hey, I'm proud of my Suburban Nightmare roots.
Well, Blag, I gotta say, it's an honor to have you on the show. It really, truly is.
But I appreciate it.
You know,
I'm
like
glad I was there to warp your mind during your childhood.
Yeah, and that's what we were just talking about. I kind of, we were having a little chat, and Blag said, "Let's just get into it," and I fully agreed. What we were saying before was, so my uncle, wonderful man, Sam, love ya. He played on all of these records that are around me, and so did Blag, and they had a band called Suburban Nightmare, the Suburban Nightmare right there, that produced a record off of Midnight Records. And then they formed this band called Dwarves. And I gotta say, Dwarves are still touring. There have been fatalities, but 40 years, man, 40 years, that's something amazing. That's really, truly special.
Yeah, it's, man, I can't believe it, because I always say, like, we've been breaking up since 1985, So to be here 40 years later, talking about that group, and the fact that people like the early stuff when we were more of like a 60s garage kind of group, and then it sort of morphed into more of a hardcore band, and then it just took on a whole life of its own, and there was a lot of pop production and a lot of different kinds of moves, but we really never lost that kernel of just being a garage band, playing with my friends, trying to make something unique and interesting, and just letting the chips fall where they may. We never really worried about hitting it big in the music biz or getting our head patted by the industry. It was always, look, this is what we do. And, if we feel like changing, we're going to change. And, this is it.
And if you don't, you won't.
Yeah.
And it's garage. It's the perfect word for that sound. And it's fitting too, because the first time I ever heard Dwarves music was in Sam's garage. We got exposed to all sorts of amazing music from him. Zappa, Mothers, Zeppelin, all this incredible stuff. But Dwarves just sounded different to me. And I remember I was about 11 years old, and I asked him, who's playing? It was just usually my question while my brother Ben was playing the drums. And he said, called the Dwarves. I played on this record. And 11-year-old me was like, how long were you planning on keeping this for me? Like, what? What? And it really did. It really did change my life. And I want to ask, how did that core group that formed Suburban Nightmare come together?
Yeah, I mean, we all loved records. And back then, I think people will always love music, and they love music now, and they love music then. But it was different then, because you didn't have the internet. You didn't have Spotify and all these things. So if you wanted to hear something, somebody had to have the record. And then socially, we would get together and, smoke some herb or whatever and put on a record. And that's just not really something that young people do anymore. Now music is more like you put your earbuds in and you kind of enjoy it on your own. But we listened together. And so a new record would really influence things. It would change what you were thinking about, and what you wanted to do. And yeah, you mentioned Zappa. I mean, he had been a big influence on me since I was about 9, 10 years old. And, what happened was I wanted to do that, but I realized pretty early that my musical skills were sort of limited. I wasn't some guy who could just pick up the saxophone and be great, or write my music down, or any of that kind of stuff. And so it gets very frustrating. I was listening to a lot of modern jazz, and John Coltrane, and my brother
Miles Davis,
big on all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I had that, and then my parents were big on like musicals, and my dad on the Great American Songbook, and all of this music just seemed out of my reach. And then pretty early on, right at the beginning of freshman year, I got turned on to what I later figured out was like 60s garage music and rockabilly music and punk rock, all in the same couple of months, by this guy named Doug, who went to our high school. And, I really credit him with opening up this world to me. And when I heard the Ramones, it really changed my life, because I said, I can do that. I can play that on the guitar.
Right.
I can think these kind of thoughts. The only thing I really felt I had talent for was coming up with lyrics that were funny. And the Ramones really just kind of freed me to think along those lines. And I was very influenced, though, by these obscure 60s punk bands. And so right in the middle of the beginning of the hardcore era, when bands like Black Flag and Circle Jerks and Dead Kennedys were coming up, my big thing was, I know about the bands from the 60s, and not the Beatles and the Stones, but these obscure, weird bands, the Chocolate Watch Band, the 13th Floor Elevators. And so me and my friends, that was kind of our thing. Like, well, we know about this, and you don't know about this, and we're doing this. And, we kind of, so then when I started the band, it was kind of covering those kind of songs. And then pretty early on, I wrote a couple of songs. Like, I think on that record, Suburban Nightmare, I wrote a song called Love Makes Me a Monster, and a song called, Average Dick. And there's just a couple different songs. Our friend Andy, who was in there, Simone, he wrote a song called Mommy Daddy that was about kind of suburbia. And so, we very early on, we were like expressing ourselves about what we were going through, and kind of, and that to me is what a garage band is. Like, we didn't have any help. There weren't any producers. There weren't any managers. There wasn't anybody kind of telling us what to do. I would just go to clubs and say, hey, can we play? And I was 16, I mean, we played our first show at the Cubby Bear Lounge, I think, and I was 16 years old.
Wow.
So, it was very like, and things were just looser then, and we had fake IDs, and we would just go and play, yeah.
Well, so it's really cool for me to hear. And I specifically want to hone in on the part where, first of all, you talk about dad with the Great American Songbook and mom with show tunes, and, obviously the radio is on. So it's really fascinating to me that, you're in what I would probably consider to be one of the golden eras of American music as far as production and diversity and quality goes, and technology improving as well. And, you're coming in, as you're saying, like as Black Flag and those bands are coming out kind of with this knowledge of the music that came before. And one of the big messages of the show, and I think a lot of people are going to ask, what is the frontman for a 40-year rockin' band doing on Secondhand Talent? And part of the message of the show is that the love of the music didn't start with us. We got it from the generation above us, and they got it from the generation above them. And it's our job to pass it down to the next generation and make sure that that love for music stays alive. So we have you on the show because, 40 years in music, there are very few bands, fatalities or not, that have that sort of longevity and just that will to want to get that, art that you created out there.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have the right attitude. And I think I had the right attitude when I started. And then, I spent a few years knocking my head against the wall and doing the best I could. And then my attitude kind of changed, and it was hard, because you watch people get rich or get famous or get a lot of attention. And it was hard, because you're like, well, what about us? We're cool too. And then everything kind of looped around at a certain point, and I just got back to being like, like I like doing this, and this is fun, and I want to do this for the right reasons again. And paradoxically, when I did that, it helped me to like get my business straight and just go back and own my own records and run my own thing and just say, well, I like this the way it is. I would love it if 1 million people bought it, but I don't really give a fuck if 5 people buy it. And this is just what I'm doing. You can love it or hate it. And that sort of allowed me to then expand and evolve without feeling like I was selling out anything. It was just like, well, this is what I want to do next. So this is what I'm going to do. And fortunately, we had some diehard fans that would go see us live and help us through the soft periods when nobody was interested and nobody wanted to do anything, or you'd lose members or people would quit and people.
Well, that's how the Mothers did it too. That's how, the Mothers honed their thing, was by gigging every night, at like places like the Rainbow Theater, where they were just doing all sorts of weird stuff and just, get it to work out. But that tenacity to do it, that there's something to be said for that, because a lot of people want to be rock stars. A lot of people want to, get to that position, but to be willing, and I remember being 16 myself and doing my first open mic and, scared shitless that they wouldn't let me in. And you just do it. You got to just want to do it.
Yeah, I never, I think everybody who makes music and disseminates it publicly wants other people to like it. So I never really bought like, oh, I just do it for myself. But at the same time, it's like, we came from a suburban town with a bunch of rich people in it. I didn't like them. They didn't seem like fun, interesting people to me. They seemed like boring assholes to me. And so I think for some people, they have that like, I come from the streets or I come from the slums and I need to be big and I want to be a big rock star and I want to be in the limo and I want to do this and that. And like, I never thought about any of that. And
you owned what you were. You were the suburban nightmare.
Right. Even at that, like we weren't even trying to act like we were anything different than what we were. Like we knew that we came from this snotty suburban town that people hated. I hated it too, so it was like, okay, here we go. I mean, that was kind of the vibe, and so I can honestly say I really never cared about being a rock star, but I wanted to get a bunch of pussy. I wanted to be able to not have a day job so I could write songs all day and make records and travel and go places. So like money is part of that. Like you need some money. And that was really hard because we just got crushed for money for good 15, 20 years. I mean, it was just impossible to I look back at it, it was like we were just running on fumes all the time. I mean, I went to Europe 3 times without a credit card. We did whole tours in the back of a cargo van with no AC driving through, Florida in the middle of July.
God.
I mean, it was just whatever horrible thing you do. I mean, I didn't even have a bed, let alone a bedroom or whatever. I mean, the first 4 or 5 years of the band, when I had left home and we moved to California, and, it was like, I didn't even have a bed. I slept in a guy I knew's closet. It was just like, if you have the tenacity to do that, then you're like a rare person. Like I just didn't care about anything, but I was going to make some cool records and I was going to play some cool shows. And that was about it. And at the same time, I've lived in California a long time. I lived in New York some. There's certain places where you can kind of get discovered. Los Angeles, New York, Nashville, certain places. And so your expectations change and the things you want change and the people who make you promises change. But it was very rare. Nobody ever said, I want to be your manager, or I want to be your lawyer, or I want to, be your agent, or whatever. We had to ask for whatever we got. And about the best we ever got was like, hey, you guys want to put out our record? And then some labels signed us and gave us nothing, or it was like book an agent and it'd be like, well, looks like you already got a whole tour booked. I guess I'll book another one for you for 10%, whatever it was. Like, it was never, nobody from the industry was ever like interested. And so I think, at the time you feel really bad about that, because it's like, what's wrong with me? Or am I not talented? Or is nothing ever going to happen with me? Or does nobody care about this? But ultimately, it made us really strong and impenetrable. Like, all the guys I knew in the 90s who got a record deal and people were kissing their ass and they had a manager. And then it's like, one way or the other, you turn around now, none of them own their records. They're all broke. And they're still drinking their face off every day saying, I deserve better, If you did it the way I did, which was a true underground band, then, it's like, hey, I feel lucky. I make money playing music. I don't have to work. I get to write another song today if I feel like it. And, I'm really proud of the art that I made. And I got to expand and grow and evolve. And I got to work with people that were like big name people, not because they had been hired by my manager or my lawyer, but just because they loved me and they loved what I was doing. And so I got to work with guys like Josh Freese, who's now in the Foo Fighters, or like, guys like Nick Oliveri, who was from,
I was going to bring him up later, the Human Cannonball. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, Eric Valentine, who produced, Smash Mouth, Third Eye Blind, All American Rejects, and all of these really big acts, Slash, and it would just be like, like sometimes their management would say, like, why are you working with this guy? Like, and it would just be like, we love Blag. We love what he's doing, and like, you can't buy that. You can't manufacture that. It only comes about if you're for real. And, like, it's tough sometimes when you're trying to pay the rent or do what you need to do. It's like, I wish it could be a little less real and just have some cash. But, eventually that all came out in the wash because I got to own my own records. Labels weren't trying to keep my shit. And, for the most part. And, so it was like, it's funny how this stuff comes around if your heart's in the right place,
Yeah, it really reminds me of something that a previous guest, Bob Dorr, said in an interview. He was living in a studio for a while because he didn't have a roof, and bands come in and out all the time, and every band has their own drama. And he said, I found myself getting involved in these band situations. And one day I asked the guy who owned the studio, how do you stay out of this, man? How do you avoid this? And he said, I see every band twice, on their way up and on their way down. The rest is up to them. And I found that so illuminating, and it really sounded a lot like, it reminds me of, you mentioned the band earlier, the 13th Floor Elevators, one of the first bands I ever listened to. It sounds like, you were truly living in a time of your own, to paraphrase the name of one of their songs. And that's really kind of the ethos of Secondhand Talent. The people who are the members of bands or musicians that we do have on the show, they're doing it all themselves. They're booking their own shows, they're producing their own merch, they are doing everything from all the way from on the wingspan, from the right to the left and everything in between. And those are the people we want to feature because they are putting in the groundwork, they are putting in the sweat equity to earn that in the future. And you mentioned one other thing that I really want to hone in on: owning your music. I think people are just starting to realize now, with all of the, the streaming services, and, people are talking about, Spotify was recently in the highlight at the time of this taping for the amount that they pay per stream to the artists. I think the value and the also as well as the personal importance of owning your own music is kind of lost on the general public. And I was wondering if you maybe could illuminate for our listeners and readers and
Yeah,
viewers, like
absolutely.
what does
And
that mean to own your own
there
music?
is a story to that. But before I get there, let me just say to everybody who does do their own thing, don't pat yourself on the back too much, because that's one side of the game. The other side of the game is, can you make great art doing it yourself?
Mm.
There's a lot of people who are like, I played the drums and I played the guitar and I recorded it and it's me singing. And it's like, hey, you suck at everything, you know? And it's like, part of my game was, yeah, okay, I'm making this record and yeah, we got 10 grand to make it. How can I make it sound like everybody else's $300,000 record? So part of it is pushing yourself to make something great still, and not just be like, I'm so proud of myself, I'm independent. It's like, oh, good, you're independent. As my grandma.
What is that like? What does that mean? Like, okay,
Yeah,
you're
it's like,
independent. Like, explain that, elucidate.
it could mean you're running your own show and doing what you want, which is what I'm trying to do, or it could mean nobody wants me. Nobody wants to sign your stuff.
Right,
Nobody
right.
wants to listen
I'm
to your music.
independent because nobody fucking wants to be around me.
Right.
Like,
And so I would just say to everybody who pushes the independent side of it, push yourself one step further and see if you can make a good record too, because that's kind of part of it. My thing was never like, I'm going to make the best low budget piece of shit I can. And it's cool because it's a low budget piece of shit. It's like, no, how can I make this? Because this is what I have to work with. How can I make this as great as possible? How can this be my Abbey Road or whatever, and that was the tricky part. And that was where meeting some of these other people who had interfaced with the industry and gotten more mileage out of it, like an Eric Valentine or Josh Freese, they were able to help me, partly out of the goodness of their heart and partly because they loved what I was doing. And they were like, hey, I'm sick of getting ordered around by A&R guys or sitting here being one of the best drummers in the world and you're micromanaging me and telling me what to do. Or I'm, guys who are great producers. It was like they knew that I respected them and I was going to let them take part. So that's part of the game. Now, as far as owning your own record goes, just to put it simply, if you get a record deal and somebody pays for you to go into the recording studio, they own your record. You don't own it. So the way to get out of that, if you don't have the money to record yourself or do whatever, is to do what's called a licensing deal. So when the person offers you the shitty recording contract you're supposed to sign that says, I'll give you $5,000 and I own your record, you say, I'll take the $5,000, but I will license you the record. I am going to license this to you. I own it, but it's yours for the next 5 years or 7 years or whatever, some reasonable length of time. When you do it the standard way, people are putting very small amounts of money now. People are doing $1,000 budgets all the time. And then they own 10, 12 songs that you sweated over. They didn't pay for the rehearsal space. They didn't pay for anything. It didn't even cover the cost of recording it, but they're paying basically to print up the records. And all of a sudden they own your shit forever. And that's what happened to me and to most of the bands that I knew. It took many years to extricate ourselves from those deals or to buy our way out of those deals, or sometimes for the people to just take pity on us and go, well, here's your record back, but you don't want to count on that. So the simple thing that I would say to people is, if it's low budget, do a licensing deal. And if they won't do a licensing deal, go, hey man, I love you, but no. And that's the hardest thing to do because you're a band, you're young, you want your record out, somebody makes you an offer, you feel good. But that's when, any good lawyer will tell you that, like, just because you hire a lawyer doesn't mean the lawyer knows anything or is giving you good advice. And a lot of lawyers in Los Angeles or New York or Nashville don't even ever think of a license deal because their take on it is like, I think you're going to be big, buddy, and we're going to get you to a big place. And these big guys are saying, here, they'll give you 10 grand. Look, I know it ain't that much money, but hey, these guys are big. It's like, well, if they're so big, then they can either give me $1 million or I'll take their 10 grand and we'll do a license deal. And if it goes great, I'll want to stay with them. And if it goes the way 95% of record deals go, I'll be glad I got it back in 5-7 years, because they are not going to do shit with it. They're going to put it out and hope for the best.
Yeah.
And, you know, so again, it puts you in a position where you don't need to hate the record company. I went around hating a lot of record companies for a long time because they own my stuff. They took it out of print. Right. So now when I make deals with people, I don't have to hate anybody. It's like, sure, dude, you can do this for 5 years. And 5 years later, it's mine again. And that way I don't have to hate you, even if you fuck up.
Yeah,
You know, hey,
or
you know, 5 years, I can handle it, you know.
or if, circumstances happen. I mean, at the time of this taping, I'm not sure if this interview will come out before or after the one I'm about to reference. But I had the pleasure of sitting down with Christopher Thorne from Blind Melon the other day. And one of the general questions for Christopher was like, is there going to be new music? Is that last album ever going to be put out? And he was very blunt about it and pretty much said kind of exactly what you said. It's like, we're trying to, work with or around or through the record label to get the rights to be able to put this out. He said, I want it out there, but there's this rigmarole that we're going through. And he said, and everything happened so quickly for us that we couldn't process it. And then it was over. And
just to give you an idea of how fucked up record deals are, and again, I don't want to get too far in the weeds with business stuff. I'm not your fucking lawyer. I make records. But at the end of the day, it's like, think of it like this. If you go to a bank and you borrow money to buy a house and you make all of the payments, that bank is going to make money on you. If the house cost $1 million, that bank is going to make, $100,000 off your loan or whatever over the space of 30 years, right?
Sure.
But at least at the end, if you make all your payments, you get to own the house. The way records deals work is different. They lend you the money, you make the record. Then all of the money to pay for the record comes out of your royalties. So for every dollar that comes in, the label's keeping 80 cents or more, 85 cents. You're getting 15 cents, but your 15 cents goes to pay back the loan they gave you. But unlike a house loan, once you're done paying back that loan with your royalties, you don't own shit. They still own your record forever. Only now you finally get your 15 cents for every dollar that comes in. So record deals are analogous to like sharecropping. Sharecropping was what they did after slavery so that they could keep black people on the farm working and broke. So they let them be a sharecropper, which meant they had to borrow the seeds and the farm implements and the land, and then they worked it. And then at the end of it, they still didn't own their land, and they still didn't own, and then they just had to borrow next year.
And then they had to use the crop to pay the rent. Or the harvest to pay
off your loan.
Right.
So
wow.
Record deals are essentially sharecropping. It's one of the most fucked up deals. And so when you see somebody in a band, just understand that person is like a coal miner in Appalachia in 1952. That person is like, a black person on a Mississippi farm in 1932. That's the deal that they're being asked to take. And it takes a long time to figure that out. And, when you do, there's different things you can do with that information. Some people just give up. They go, fuck it. And other people go, well, shit. I can scrape $5,000 together. Maybe I'll do my own record. And those are the people who hang on and do things, So, like I said, I don't want to go too far in the weeds about what record deals are, but that's basically what they are. So if you're going to make a record deal with somebody, make sure it's a license deal with a term. And that term should be 5 years, 7 years, something like that. And not much more than that. Because if you just sign a record deal with somebody, they just own your shit.
That is rock solid advice, folks. For those of you listening, watching, or reading, I've been in and around this industry for, at the time of this airing, probably damn near 20 years. And, this is the first I'm hearing of structuring a record deal like that. And what a valuable piece of information to put out there, especially for all these up and coming bands that are trying to get stuff done, but do want to keep the rights to their music because they do love the art that they make. And it is beautiful and it is a part of them.
And the same thing applies, incidentally, to comedians, and the same thing applies to, visual artists and poets and photographers. The place where it gets strange is film, because the budgets tend to be much higher. There's more cooperation between people. There's more, if it's going correctly, there's at least some kind of salaries going around. And so there you have a little bit different, who owns The Godfather? Should it be Coppola because he directed it? Should it be Al Pacino because he was the breakout star of it? Should it be Marlon Brando because he was the big star in it? Should it be Mario Puzo who wrote the book that it was based on? So film is a different world, but again, copyright law is pretty standard across all art forms. And you basically, the person in charge is the person who owns the copyright.
Bringing it back to thank you so much for explaining that the way you did. It's really clear that even I could understand it. So I genuinely appreciate that. Bringing it back to Dwarves, though, because that's what we're here to talk about.
Yeah, big dick swinging across the music industry, man. The Dwarves, rock legend.
So, it's definitely a statement when you change out a band member, you call it a fatality. I feel like that is a garage grunge punk fucking thing right there. And I have this little excerpt here that I would like to read because I find it quite entertaining, and I think the subject of it will as well if he's watching. Appearing in Chicago with the Cramps, dwarf singer Blag Jesus, then Blag Jesus, we'll talk about the change later, is told to leave Illinois or face criminal prosecution for impersonating a celebrity. Drummer Slambo becomes the band's first fatality, falling off the roof of Medusa's in an amphetamine haze shortly before the band's relocation to San Francisco. So
I gotta see that. You gotta mail me that. You gotta email me that. I never saw that one. I love it.
I'll absolutely get it to you. So, folks, in case you haven't figured it out, Slambo is my uncle, my dear Uncle Sam, and he, his story is one that we will tell another day. What I want to hear about now, after your first fatality, we don't need to discuss the move. You and I know, but after your first fatality, was that what prompted the move out west, or were there other reasons behind that? Were you wanting to get discovered? You were already in. We're not going to say exactly where you were, but you're in the Chicagoland area.
Yeah, it might have been better for us. Well, I'm Highland Park proud, because for me,
there we go.
Would go downtown to Chicago and people hated us because we had, cute girlfriends and little mini skirts and driving my dad's station wagon to fucking go play a show. Like, people hated us. So right away there was fights and there was attacks and there was fucking, we hate you. It's from my earliest experience in stuff. And of course you couldn't really explain. I hate it here too,
Yeah, right. Right.
I want to hang out with you,
I'd rather be with you somewhere else. Let's fucking go.
Yeah, exactly. So, it was, that was a funny part of it. And that's why, even though we were like a 60s garage thing, we were just always getting in shit. We were just always getting in fights with clubs or, metaphorical fights or literal fights. And it was like, after a while, I just kind of looked at the guys. I'm like, we're a punk band. Like, that's just what we are. Even if we want to play 60s garage and wear little Beatle boots and paisley ties, it doesn't really matter. You know what I mean? Like, we just never fit in anywhere. We always got in shit everywhere. And, the Midwest,
Beatle boots and matching suits.
Yeah.
Sorry. They're in Joe's garage, man.
But you know, it was like the Midwest always had a thing of like, it's a place that you leave, you know. It was like, oh shit, I was born in the Midwest, you know, I better go somewhere. You go to one of the coasts. And
A
I kind
great place
of
to be from. Detroit,
yeah,
great place to be from.
right, yeah, exactly. So and looking back strategically, that didn't probably turn out to be the best move, because Chicago's finally got a rock scene that was local and that meant something. Maybe 4 or 5 years after we left, you started seeing bands like Urge Overkill get big. Ministry, of course, kind of created their whole own genre. Then bands that had sort of commuted up there or moved there, like Smashing Pumpkin and
Local H, I think, around that time.
H. And so there actually would have been a scene there. And maybe if we would have hung out, I would have been more like in a smaller pond and able to really get a name for doing stuff there. But at
hanging
the time,
out is lame.
What?
Hanging out is lame.
Yeah. I mean, what happened was we just like in 80, I think it was basically I moved out in 84 and I went to Boston for a while. I went to New York for a while. But I always loved my band, and I would come back and I was trying to get them. It's like, let's move to LA. But the bass player wanted to move to San Francisco because he was going to go to school there. And I said, fine, you know, we'll go there. So we went to San Francisco, and then we went to LA to play shows. So it was always that thing coming from Illinois of like, let's get out of Illinois. But I think, you know, because you can't really predict, like Material Issue or Joe Overkill, Liz Phair, that all kind of got big in that early 90s thing. And so had I stayed in that scene that I was part of, something might have happened there, but we'll never know, you know, because we left.
Facts. That's right. I mean, that's the thing, is that there's no sense in there's no sense in going down the path of coulda, shoulda, woulda, you know, like, because who knows, maybe if you would have hung out for that 5 years, you know, you would have not kept doing it, or something might have happened, you know, like the fact that you made the move. And then I gotta say, driving from the Bay Area to LA to do shows I mean, that's a drive for folks who don't know. That's a decent drive out there.
That's a funny thing that you say that, because when we moved here, like the San Francisco rock scene is largely dead and has been dead for a long time. This town is dead. It just got too yeah, it just got too expensive to live here. And people, but at the time we moved here in the 80s, there were a lot of bands from San Francisco, and there was a pretty thriving scene here. But what made us laugh, you know, the first thing I did when I got to San Francisco was try and book shows in San Francisco, and then call clubs in LA and try and book shows there. And I would talk to bands in San Francisco that were getting 300 and 400 people to come out and see them on a weeknight in San Francisco. And I would say, wow, you know, what do you guys do in LA? And they're like, we don't like LA. We're not going there. And I would just be like, are you kidding me? You know, but that was that San Francisco attitude. Like, we're not LA. And I was like, hey, fuck all the dumb shit. I don't come from out here. I'm not taking part in your battle. And it's funny because it's like the Boston, New York battle. One side takes part, the other side doesn't. If you ask people from New York, what do you think about Boston? They go, oh, Boston's great.
Yeah, it's nice to visit.
We hate New York, you know, and it's the same bullshit with San Francisco and LA. You say to people in San Francisco, what do you think of LA? Like, oh, we hate it. We don't like it. You say to people in LA, hey, what do you think about San Francisco? They go, oh, I go up there sometimes. It's great.
It's got a nice bridge.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, like, I'm not taking part in your fucking fight. So the first thing we did was go down to LA and start playing. And, you know, we were already tied in with an LA record label called Bomp Records, which was like an underground garage kind of label. And, you know, it was like, I wasn't taking part in that shit. People in San Francisco got stuck here. So it was like, all right, dude, so you got 300-400 of your buddies from high school to show up to see your band play. Great. You know, I'm proud of you. And then you went nowhere. You never went. You wouldn't even go to LA, for Christ's sake, let alone anywhere else. So Dwarves hit the road pretty quick. It was like we became a touring band. I mean, first we played everywhere we could, California for 3-4 years. And then
there's a lot there. I mean, like, you know, Bay Area, then there's north of that, then the Sacramento area, LA, San Diego. I mean, so there's a ton just
Yeah.
and that's not in Illinois. That's Illinois is just
Right.
not, Midwest is just not like that. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And so then we made it up to Seattle for the first time in 89, I think. And at that point, and the reason we made it there was because we did a national tour in 88, which was really hard. I mean, we had no money. We all had to quit our jobs. And,
how many stops were on that tour, if you remember?
4.
Oh,
So we drove from San Francisco to El Paso, Texas, played a show, hung out for a day, drove from El Paso to New York,
what the fuck?
played one show at CBGB's record store, drove for free, drove to DC, played at a place called the Safari Club where they hated us. We were ignored. There was probably 10 people there. Nobody liked us. Didn't make a friend, didn't make anything. People talked to me about the DC scene. It was very cold to the Dwarves. And then the next week we went and we just hung out, slept at people's houses. Then we played CBGB's and got banned from CBGB's and then drove home. So
What'd you
literally
get banned
we drove
for?
6,000 miles for 4 shows.
What'd you get banned from CBGB's for? Because you weren't country, bluegrass, or rock?
CBGB's. I took LSD before that show, and I came out, and the first thing I did, like, we did like 3 songs, and the first thing I did was, like, I didn't realize at CBGB that there were tables, and it was like a club, like a nightclub, and I just jumped head first, and I got up, and I had trashed this whole couple's table, and they got up horrified with drinks all over them, and I was bleeding out of my head. I'd smashed my head into it, and they just shut us down. And we never played CBGB's again. That the band continued in for. We were supposed to play there like 25 years later, and it was like, no, they're banned here. I'm like, really? Like, there's no statute of limitations.
God damn.
But I mean, this is how weird the career of the Dwarves was. Gerard Kozloy was there, who later started a big label called Matador, and at the time he was a writer. And I think he was tied in with a label called Homestead. I'm not sure, but he was a writer for the Village Voice, and he got a famous picture of me where I'm standing there and my head is bleeding, and my name was Blag Jesus, and so it says, the headline said Bleeding Jesus. Well, out in Seattle, there were some guys paying attention, and they wound up, Sub Pop Records wound up bringing us up to play a show with Guar, and that was the first time we went to Seattle, and that was the label that we wound up signing with. And so you never know what's going to get somebody's attention, what's going to make somebody do something. If we hadn't driven 6,000 miles for a bunch of dog shit shows and lost our jobs and been broke, we never would have made it up to Seattle, and that was where stuff kind of kicked off for us. So it was very the ascent of the Dwarves, if you can even call it an ascent, is so bizarre, and the like you could never put it together intentionally.
It's kind of like that saying, like falling up the stairs type thing, like
right.
Yeah. You know, where you're just going with the motion and trying to do as best you can. And you know what? It turns out, head diving into a couple's dinner table was the thing that caught people's eye. And that's definitely where I was going to lead the conversation to next was, the introduction of all the labels, Sub Pop in the early 90s. I mean,
when CBGB closed, a lot of people were crying about it. I was the only person laughing, because we outlasted those motherfuckers. They can kiss my ass too. Anyway, which brings me to Sub Pop, a label that I fucking hate. And I got my records back from them, so I'm free. I couldn't say this all those years. And it was like, you have to understand, like, I don't have any biological kids that I'm aware of. And, these records are my children. And they took 2 of my children and, covered them with a blindfold and threw them in a closet for 30 years, because only Blood, Guts, and Pussy was in print. And I was personally hurt by that. And I sat around not getting to say what I wanted to say about those people for a long time because they had my record. But when I got my record back, hey, they can suck my dick. The fact that you would take somebody's record out of print without offering it back to them is disgusting. And a lot of the record industry is based on that, of just ignoring what artists need and fucking people off and not caring. And it's like, it isn't even a business decision, because as soon as I put those records back in print, I made thousands of dollars off them. So it's more just like an asshole decision. It's more just like vision of, we don't like you now, and we got rid of you, so your record's gone and whatever.
So they just get to take your shit out of circulation, right. and because you, as you were talking about earlier, the difference between licensing versus a standard record deal. I would imagine that they probably loop into some of that bullshit language that that they don't have to approach the band about pulling something from circulation. And just the idea to me of pulling something from circulation is horrifying. I think that that's just such a terrible thing to do to any artist. It doesn't matter if the art is good or bad, honestly, in my opinion. Right. Each and every artist works so hard on creating, Secondhand Talent is my baby, the same way Dwarves is yours. And, I can't imagine waking up tomorrow and being told who my next guests are or how many episodes. Like, no.
Right. Especially by people who didn't make the art and didn't like the art and didn't care about it. But in one of those strange twists of fate, the woman who runs that label now is actually a friend of mine, and I like her. So it's odd how this stuff works, because you'll meet people years ago. I met her, I liked her, I thought she was a nice person. I still do. I hate her company, and I hate the people who were involved with defrauding me and fucking me over and minimizing my importance and trying to make me be small. I really have a problem with that. And I don't think that labels should be involved with that. I think if they don't want to do your record anymore, they should, make arrangements to get it back to you or sell it back to you or do whatever. And again, I would suggest to anybody from my age group, go back and look at the Sonny Bono copyright law, because Sonny Bono did a great thing for artists of all kinds when he got that law passed. And basically all of us get our the term of a copyright is 70 years. So halfway through it, 35 years in, you can get your copyrights back from whomever is pretending to own them. And you start the process 30 years in, and you get it back 35 years in. And I would strongly suggest to anybody who's my age and wants to get their records back, that avenue is open to you if you jump through the correct hoops, and you can figure out how to do that with the U.S. Copyright Office, getting stuff back is very important to some of us. This is my art. It was my life. And I don't appreciate any motherfucker hanging on to it and hanging on to it just to strangle it and not put it out. It's disgusting.
You mentioned that, you were doing all this stuff, driving all around the country. You were weary. You're gigging, you're traveling, you're trying to, sustain and maintain at the same time when you really don't have means or resources to be able to do either. At what point was it only around recently when did you realize it at the time that the labels were taking your music? Or
no, I realized it around age 26 or 27. And from then on, I only would make records that I had paid for myself, so that I owned them and I licensed them. For the most part, actually, there was one that was a little different than that. But again, look, I'm not here to give you everybody business advice. No. What is the amount of money that makes it worth it? If someone walked up to me today and said, Blag, I'll give you $1 million and I want you to make this record for me, I'd go, sure. Because I would do the math on that and go, I can live with that. And if the person's so stupid that they take the record out of print, it'd be like, well, okay. They paid for the right to be stupid. I've got $1 million here. I spent 20 of it making a record that I liked, and okay. I got, $980,000 here for you to be an asshole and pull my record out of print. Okay. But that wasn't the kind of money they were throwing around back then. So the idea that, for some pittance worth of money, people get to own your shit and throw it away is low. And people, it's funny how it works too, because Taylor Swift made a big deal about this when she figured out about ownership.
That epiphany moment.
And had that epiphany. But of course, so I'm very much of two minds on that. On the one hand, Taylor's an artist. I think she should get to have her own copyrights. But Taylor's full of bullshit on the level of the whole reason that the industry exists is because of those artists. It's because of artists like Taylor Swift or the Beatles or whomever that moved a lot of units. That's why it's set up this way. So it's like you can't have it both ways. She wanted to get all of that spoon feeding from the industry, all of the marketing, all of the advertising, all of they pay for your agents and they pay for your tour bus and they pay for your stuff. And then when she was a huge industry of her own, it was like, hey, how come I don't get to own my own records? It's like, no, dude, people who made the kind of money you did, you're fine. It's everybody else who doesn't get to own their records and didn't make that kind of money who gets fucked by the industry as it is. It's people like you who create the conditions for this to happen. And the industry's argument is, hey, look at all the money we put into marketing and all the money we put into getting this person going. And you can't argue that it didn't work. Everybody loves Taylor. So without us, where would she be? And that's a reasonable argument from their standpoint. I don't mind that they make $2 million for every 1 million she makes. What I mind is that there's all these situations where for every million the label makes, the artist still gets nothing and they don't own their record, all because, they overspent on a video or whatever. So that's the crux of this, is understand that most people don't wind up being Taylor. And that you probably won't, regardless of what you're engaged in. And so if you care about your music and want it to live, then you have to find a way to own it. And if you need other people to pay for manufacturing or marketing or whatever, you can license things to them, or you can give them a percentage of things or whatever. Again, I'm not trying to be your business manager. Do it any way you want. But for a lot of this, it basically comes down to, I don't want to deal with record manufacturers. I don't want to deal with artists and photographers. I don't want to deal with all that shit. So you do it. Well, you can still have them do it, licensing it to them, as opposed to letting them own it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a high cost to passing the buck. You could either take charge of what's yours, or you can, it is nice to get all that off your shoulders, but at what cost? I mean,
it happens to the biggest artists. The Beatles had a stupid manager who made a merch deal for them in America. This guy came up to them and said, what about 90-10? And what he was suggesting was, you guys get 90%, I get 10%. But their manager, Brian Epstein, was so stupid that he said, no, I insist on 15. We got to get 15%. And the guy was like, okay. So all of a sudden, he had offered, I'll take 10%, and then he got 85%. Right? So
beset on all sides by idiots.
And they do dumb shit. Elvis's manager was a piece of shit. He never toured the world because his manager couldn't get back into the country if he left America, and he didn't trust Elvis to go out on his own. So Elvis never once played a show outside of the United States for any reason. And that, again, is just an example of how horrible these people can be. So you mentioned Led Zeppelin. Their manager just absconded with all their money. He just embezzled it and left. So they thought they had this hard kick-ass manager that fought and got them a bunch of money. Yeah, great. And then he bailed.
Mickey Hart's dad did it to the Grateful Dead. I mean, like, it happened. Right? It can happen to everyone. But I want to
passing the buck has a price. the price that's attached to ignorance. It's like if you say, oh, my kid has to go to daycare. I'll just drop her off anywhere. It's not a big priority. Well, if your kid gets molested, you didn't molest them, but
God forbid.
You didn't take care of your shit, right?
Yeah.
So you got to take care of your shit. Nobody wants a bad thing to happen to their kid, but are you taking the time to make sure that you reasonably indemnify? I mean, a parent can't stop everything bad that might happen to their kid, but they can stop a lot of it by paying a little bit of attention. It's the same with your career. You got to pay a little bit of attention to your career, or, when you get fucked over, you can say, well, this person fucked me over. It's like, yeah, they did. Were you paying any attention? I wasn't paying attention for the first 10 years or more of my career. So I got fucked a lot of ways. And then I started paying attention.
But yourself too. And once you figured this out, this record label debacle, what was the process like of producing that first record?
It was tough. I had a buddy who was doing good and was recording a lot of bands and had a bunch of money. And I borrowed, I think, $7,000 from him. And I had, and so I went in and recorded a record that came to be Dwarves Are Young and Good Looking, which was our best-selling record. And I had a good feeling at that point because during the grunge era, we were like odd man out. We were like the token punk band of that movement, but it didn't really translate into because when you listen to our records, it wasn't like, oh, this sounds like Pearl Jam or something. But when the bands like Green Day and Offspring came up, we already knew those guys, and it was like, okay, this is more like our genre. This is more like Ramones-y punk on a certain level. And so it was one of the few times that what the Dwarves were actively doing kind of interfaced with what the public was listening to, right, during that pop punk era. And I had also, I had a buddy from an Illinois band called Material Issue, Jim Ellison. And he gave me advice about songwriting, and we talked about songwriting, and I started looking at it less just instinctively from the gut and more like, how are songs structured? And I came up with songs like Everybody's Girl and One Time Only and You Gotta Burn that had a lot of the earlier Dwarves material was like chorus, verse, chorus out, whatever it was. And this stuff started to be structured more like, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, and I started paying more attention to that. And it all kind of came together on that record. And I knew I had a good idea and I knew I had the guys to play it. But then I got lucky and I just stumbled into Eric Valentine. And so all of those things happening at once created that Young and Good Looking record that was very nerve-wracking because I was all made with borrowed money and I couldn't pay anybody to be on it. And it was, but I had a good feeling about it. And I wound up being able to, license that to Epitaph Records, which was sort of the preeminent pop punk label of the time. They had Offspring and Rancid and Bad Religion and these bands. And so that kind of gave us our second start. And that really put me on the path. The other thing was meeting Eric. He taught me in the same way that when I started talking to songwriters about how to structure songs, and I already knew kind of some of that stuff instinctively, and I'd written different things, and some of it had pre-choruses and breakdowns and different things. So I kind of knew those elements, but I started thinking more about it then. But then meeting Eric really made me think in a applied way about production and what you needed to do, not just to write something that was good, but to actually have it come out good at the end. Production is sort of the art of making a finished object out of something that's just theoretical. A song is just theoretical. A band is just a bunch of people. Producing something is making an object. And once I started thinking about it that way and had the example of Eric slowly but surely, I started to kind of figure out how to produce things. And, you know, different people have different talents. I'll never have the ears that an Eric Valentine has.
Sure.
It's a combination of being born with it and also working really hard. And I was just never going to be that guy. But I could hear it. I knew it when I heard it. And so I was able to bring people into my orbit that could do that kind of stuff for me.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where it remains to this day. Like, I consider myself like not so much a producer as like a casting director. I know who to hire to do what I need to do, and they will do it for me. And I compensate them in a fair way. And I acknowledge everybody's, you know, what they've done, you know, and that's kind of my job. So that in music, we call that a producer. So that's what I am.
And you know, I appreciate that you brought up young and good looking, and it makes me feel happy that was the first one, because two of my favorite Dwarves songs are actually on that record, Everybody's Girl and You Gotta Burn.
Yeah, those two are really classic jams. And Everybody's Girl, I really owe a great debt to Illinois, because it was Jimmy Ellison from Material Issue who said to me, "You should do a song about a girl's name." Now, he had hits already with songs like, you know, Renee Remains the Same and Valerie Loves Me. And he was getting played on MTV with that stuff. And so when he said that to me, I was like, "Jim, I love you, but come on, that's your gimmick. I'm not taking your gimmick. And that's fucking, I don't know, that's not really me." And then 2 weeks later, a light bulb went off in my head, and I said, not just one girl's name, a bunch of girls' names. Now it's the Dwarves. And I wrote it. And then when we got it going, I called up Jim, and I was like, "Jim, I love you, man. You were right. This is the best song I ever wrote." And, you know, 6 months later, he was dead. So it was very like typical Dwarves, you know, there's always some tragedy in there, you know.
Sometimes the fatalities, unfortunately, are fatalities, and you know, of course, you know, rest in peace to all the lost members. But
yeah, man, and you know, Jim was a great guy, and he was a good example of, he was successful in the music business. He had hits, you know, he had big management and different things, but he respected me, and he understood, and he said, "You know, man, that the Dwarves, that's yours, man. Nobody can take that from you." You know, because when I started hanging out with him, I was like, "I don't really want to do that anymore." And we just get in fights, and everybody hates us. And he was like, "No, man, you know, people love the Dwarves, and you're important, and you don't have to, you know, you do what you want to do," you know. And it was I needed to hear that from someone who was successful. You know, I think sometimes successful people are so busy building up their own success that they forget that they can really help people who are not doing as well when you see them struggling. That's where successful people can help, and often they don't, you know. And I'll always love Jim for doing that for me. And there have been other people who've done that, guys like Josh Freese. You know, he didn't have to extend a hand to me. And in fact, it'd be safer for him to kind of keep his distance from the weird guy from the Dwarves. But instead, he embraced me, you know, and then that helps to legitimize you to other successful people, you know. And Eric helped me and didn't turn his back on me when he had big hits. He didn't say, "Oh, yeah, I did that, but I don't really want to be tied in with that anymore." He embraced me, and that really meant a lot. You know, you need that sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, whether they know it or not, you know, several of the guests who have been on this show, who are, you know, older than me, have given some advice, you know, just in the course of the interview that I've really taken to heart. And some things were hard to admit. Some things are hard to internalize. But at the end of the day, my reasoning was, well, if I can't take the advice of someone who's been there and done that and is where I want to be, then how the fuck am I ever going to get there? And, you know, kind of similar to how you were saying, you know, none of the guests on my show owe anything to me. You know, it's just, I'm grateful for everyone who comes on the show. And I feel this incredible sense of wonder that folks want to be on the show.
Well, it's funny, we
And
were talking about producers, and
yeah,
you know, a lot of artists don't know how to have a producer, especially in something
or a
like
manager.
yeah, or a manager. And I've been accused of this myself, and I understand where people are coming from when they say it. But I think I'm pretty good. I have these long-standing people, my accountant, my lawyer, that I really have a great rapport with. But I never was able to make something happen with a manager. And with producers, it's like being an alcoholic. You have to admit first that you have a problem and you need something. And with a producer, there's so many artists that have all their pride and they're like, I already know everything and I'm in here. And then they got this producer and he told me to do this thing and I don't feel like doing that. And it's like, okay, dude, you know, like I get it. And not every producer is right for every artist. But for me, when I found Eric, I found a guy that I could trust, and he filled in the gaps that I had. And now I have that with Andy Carpenter, who's a great producer. And we even became like a songwriting team because I had so much respect for him. He always knows how to fill in what I can't do. He's good at the things that I can't do. And he's good at a lot of other stuff too. And he's just a brilliant guy, Andy Carpenter. But it's like, you know, with these people, you have to admit to yourself first that you need some help. So when and it's the same way that I produce records, whether I'm doing it for myself or someone else. I always start with what's good, what I think is good. And then I try and fill in everything else. So on my records, it's like, well, I think my lyrics are funny and they're good. And I think my vocal melodies are good and they're catchy. And so I don't need a lot in that realm. But I need everything else. Somebody's got to come in and play drums on this thing, and it ain't going to be me. So who's it going to be? And who's going to play bass on this? And who's going to play guitar? And then it's like, who's going to be the person that tells me you're repeating yourself too damn much? You did the same thing in song 7 as you did in 9 and 12. Who's going to get in there and help me do this right and make this as good as it can be? And a lot of people just aren't ready for a producer, especially people who got lucky their first time around and they had a big hit. There's a lot of people like that. They're young, lightning in a bottle, everything strikes at the same time. They wrote the right song at the right time. They didn't even think about producers or anything else. The label fixed them up with somebody, boom, they got a hit. And then from then on, you see them get worse and worse and worse because they're convinced that they're geniuses and that nobody else did anything. And then it's like, oh no, dude, all of the subsequent tracks you tried to make were worse than that one. Did you stop to figure out why? You know?
You really elucidated perfectly how much I appreciate my producer, Mario. Shout out to you, buddy. It took 3 seasons for me to admit that I needed help with this. It was becoming something that I just couldn't do solo. And like you were saying, it's a really hard thing to do, to admit or accept the fact that you need help. But when the help comes from a place of somebody wanting to be a part of what you're doing and wanting to be a part of your art, you know, Mario approached me as a friend and a fan of the show and said, hey, how can I help? And he's been with us. You know, he helped me produce all of season 4, all of season 5, and I'm too close to this. You know what I mean? And it takes somebody who does have, you know, that overhead view or an outside perspective, or they're not wrapped in making every song or every episode or every joke or whatever the case may be, to say, hey, I'm noticing things that you're not. And then you have to be able to understand that he might be right.
Plus, like the Beastie Boys, you can say at the boards is the man they call Mario. So that,
He,
that gives
we're
you
saying that from now on. From now on, every time I mention him, I'm putting
or
in that
the
audio
man they
sample.
call Mario.
Mario. Beastie Boys is what shaped. I mean, if I had to pick 3 musical acts that shaped my music sensibilities as a child, I mean, you know, you can tell I'm Sam's nephew. It would be the Beastie Boys, Weird Al, and 13th Floor Elevators. Those
Wow.
were the first 3 bands that I kind of latched onto.
Well, I
And
definitely indirectly brought the 13th floor elevators to you because it was definitely me that played that for your uncle. But
that,
yeah, I
well,
mean the
thank
Beastie
you.
Boys are so brilliant. They and those first 4 albums, it's such a great. I think another group like this is the Velvet Underground, where
Mm,
they made 4 completely different albums, and they're all great. Yeah, you got the banana, and but not only are they all great, but they're really all different. You know, I think
mm.
Eminem too. He really made 4 very different albums, and they're all really brilliant. And like that's really what I aspire to as an artist, is to try and make a record that's not the same as the record that I already made, but that stands on its own. And Beastie Boys too were so great live. I saw them several times, and they just had such great energy live. Really, really great group.
I only had the opportunity ever to see them once. Justin Hampton did a poster for them a while ago, and it was one of the few times he actually wasn't able to meet the band for reasons. Go check out the interview to find out why.
Right.
But I remember for our 8th grade trip, we went to New York. It was a small class, small school, so 5 or 6 of us, and it was right. It was at the debut time of To the Five Boroughs. Which was, you know, one of the last albums produced. And I remember the big Virgin Records store in Times Square. They had this massive display, and all of a sudden we heard just these 808s thumping, and we had no idea what was going on. And all of a sudden, the Beastie Boys are rolling down through Times Square in the back of like a pickup, and Mixmaster Mike is, you know, he's sitting on the back, like on top of the truck with some decks, and they were just performing the album through the streets
Wow.
of Times Square. And growing up listening to them, and unfortunately, it's the only time I ever saw them, but fortunately, I experienced the Beastie Boys in like the most raw
Yeah, that's a great way
essence
to do it.
form. Like, you know, you can't fake something like that, you know, like that.
Yeah,
Just,
brilliant group with a very omnivorous musically. You know, there's no one who did it quite the way they did, and yeah, just a
well, I
great.
mean, you know,
But hey,
they
enough about
also,
them. What about
yeah,
me?
fuck them. Yeah. Well, I was
They
actually,
got paid.
I did want to relate one thing about them, though. What kind of a very fuck you thing the Beastie Boys did, which I love, is that after the Paul's Boutique fiasco, you know, and the whole lawsuit and sampling and all that, they were just kind of like, fuck you. We're going to make this album Check Your Head and just play all our own instruments because we're a fucking band. And like that, like, it doesn't get much more. You're going to sue us? Okay, so we'll fucking play our own music. Like, go to hell. Like, we don't need you.
Right. Or you
And
can always just play a riff that somebody else did. Like you could still sample something and then just play it live, you know. Like a lot of people were confused about what sampling meant and what you know, like I remember a lot of people in cover bands at the time, you know, or a lot of people in punk bands at the time saying to me, "Oh, hip hop is bullshit. All they do is steal something off a record." I'm like, motherfucker, you're playing the exact same chord progression Bad Religion did 20 years ago, and they're just playing the same progression that the Ramones did 10 years before that. And what is the difference between that and somebody sampling a record? I mean, give me a break, man. It's like it's all about what you do with stuff and how you make it. So again, and this is where copyright stuff gets very confusing. I think Paul's Boutique, I thought they kind of came in under the wire on that, where it was tons of samples, but it was before that law went into effect. That was the Dust Brothers who made that record, who are some of the greatest samplers of all time. But it's like that whole weird thing where Marvin Gaye's estate came after Robin Thicke for his song. Well, his song was clearly an homage to Marvin Gaye. I have homages to other bands all over my records. And if they were selling anything and anybody gave a shit, then I'd get sued for that. You know what I mean? And it's bogus. It's like, this just happened with Olivia Rodrigo had a song that was very much like Pump It Up by Elvis Costello. And they said, well, are you going to sue her and cash in? And he said, no, this is what rock and roll is. We do stuff based off other people's stuff. That's like, it's not rocket science,
So once you figured out all of this and you realized you were young and good looking, you hit it. I like how I brought it back to Dwarves.
Absolutely.
You hit it hard, didn't you? I mean, like I did my homework and I went through kind of, some of the history of the band. And after that record came out, the touring was heavy. Like what prompted? Was it the label or the record that prompted, or because you produced this record yourself, right?
That period. So as the 2000s dawned, and we had done Young and Good Looking and Come Clean, and once again lost the record deal. Playing live was how I ate, was how I paid my bills. The records brought in nothing, and I didn't own most of them. Young and Good Looking was one of the only ones I did. But, we were in recoupment hell in that for a long time. So the records brought in no money. And it was like, okay, I better figure out how to do merchandise and play a lot live. And I was young enough at that point. It was just still a lot of fun. And again, I mean, I got, part of what got me into rock and roll. Yeah, I love music, blah, blah, but I like pussy better. And I wanted it. And so you go out on the road, it was just a bonanza, so I think I was addicted to that. I was addicted to not being home because there wasn't much for me at home. I was addicted to getting strange out on the road all the time. And it was the only way I could pay my bills was by playing live. There really weren't any other avenues that were making me anything. So it was either give up music or just hit the road. And probably in that, it was, at this point, the Dwarves probably played 1,300 shows, which is a hell of a lot. And it gets hard when you're old to travel like that. I love to play, but, it just the other day, I'm driving in the middle of the night so I can get to Arizona in time to do a set at the Punk in the Park Festival. Playing the set is great, but driving all night is like shit, I'm old, it's hard. No question about it. And again, I think this is where having your heart in the right place makes a big difference, because you kind of recognize, I still love this. I still love the audience. I'm not mad at them. It's just hard to go tour, so it's like, you got to kind of figure out what's hard and what's easy and what you can do and what you can't do. And, a lot of bands just tour because that's where the money is. They never bother trying to make a great record. And, I just can't do that. So I'm all about the next records I'm making. And I made a whole new personality, a guy called Ralph Champagne. And I made a second Ralph Champagne record. The first one was very interesting, but the Dwarves of the last 20, 25 years have all been about genre hopping. So you pick up a Dwarves record and it's like, yeah, there's pop punk and then there's hardcore, but there's also thrash and grind and garage rock and noise rock and humor. And then so with Ralph Champagne, the whole idea was like, okay, I'm going to do that same thing, but with softer genres, country and Americana and humor, novelty and Latin and, all these different kind of genres that make up the other side of music that I love and that I listen to, So it was like Ralph Champagne is kind of giving me something to get old with. It's the kind of shit that's easier to sing. It's just difficult physically to sing Dwarves music for me now, because my voice has probably dropped 3 notes since I started doing it. And it's like, So with Ralph Champagne, I can kind of do my real voice and stuff that I'd be more likely to listen to. That's a little easier on your ears, but still interesting. So yeah, I mean, you get these challenges, and it gets harder in some ways, but it also gets easier when you kind of recognize what it is.
Well, Blag Jesus, then Blag Dahlia, Ralph Champagne. I really gotta ask, why the monikers? Why? And this is from the earliest days, folks. Just so we're clear, this dates back all the way to the beginning of the interview into 1985.
Suburban
Pseudonyms,
Nightmare album, I was
yeah.
called Julius Seizure. Yeah, we always came up with crazy names. I had my favorite one, I did a record called Penetration Moon that was like a mock glam band, and my name was Junior High, which I thought was funny. But, it's like, yeah, the funny name. I mean, because I have a pretty cool name. My name is Paul Cafaro, and I think it's a good name for like a filmmaker or a writer or something. Like, yeah, it's Paul Cafaro, but it never really felt rock and roll to me, like rock and roll bands I grew up with. It was like, Elvis Presley and Gene Vincent and like some kind of name like that. And then you got guys like Iggy Pop, and Stiv Bader. And so I thought, okay, Blag, because I wandered into, I think one night when we were on tour, one of the early tours, we slept at a squat house and spray painted on the wall, it said Black Jesus. And I'm like, oh, this is like fate. I'm going to be Black Jesus, and people would ask my name and say, Black Jesus. Like, you ain't Black Jesus, dude, So then I became Blag Jesus. Like it was a name like Stiv or Iggy. And it was like, okay, I'm not Black Jesus. I'm Blag Jesus. Like it was just to be silly. And then the Blag thing got carried through, and then it was like Blag Dahlia and Blag History Month and Paint It Blag and whatever. Like it was Blag, whatever. So, yeah, and I got stuck with this silly name, and I've just kind of been living with it ever since. And, man, just part of the randomness of the Dwarves and the randomness of my life,
3, 2. Well, at the time of this taping, it is a few days after Record Store Day, and Dwarves had a Record Store Day release, folks. If you could still get a copy, Sunshine, Lollipops, and Rainbows, go check it out. How does it feel, 40 years later, with this kind of, you moved out of the Midwest because it's a place to be from, and you went to the Bay Area and not LA because people wanted you to, but you started making records in Seattle, then realized you wanted to license them. You just talked about exploring all these genres, making another pseudonym. How does it feel, to knowing the first record came out 40 years ago, to have, a Record Store Day release in the resurgence of vinyl that we're seeing?
Oh, it's great. I mean, to a lot of people, they love the first thing they heard by you. So for a lot of people, the only thing they're ever going to love by the Dwarves is Blood, Guts, and Pussy. And everything else sounds like overproduced or overdone. And
we're not going to forget Horror Stories. We're not going to forget Horror Stories. Yeah. Come on.
Horror Stories was the first record, but
Blood, Guts, and Pussy is fucking awesome. Let's not.
Blood Guts is the first one most people heard. Horror Stories was more like a 60s garage record. It played to that crowd. So yeah, and so I never wanted to be one of those people who evolved and then hated where they used to be. It's like, I love Blood, Guts, and Pussy. I think it's a great record, and I think it accomplishes what it tries to do. What was interesting about Sunshine, Lollipops, and Rainbows is it was the recording from before Blood, Guts. So it's a lot of that material, but it was recorded in a much different way. Instead of doing it like a modern album, like Blood, Guts was made with a lot of overdubbing, we did Sunshine, Lollipops is just us in the studio. So it's like you would have seen the Dwarves at the rehearsal space or at a show. It was all live. The vocals were live. All the instruments were live, no overdubs. And so you really get an immediate sense of what the band was like. And you also get to hear more kind of rhythm section and stuff. Blood Guts kind of buried the rhythm section for loud guitar, and that was kind of the vibe of the moment. We were kind of trying to sound like the Misfits and that kind of a vibe.
More of a thrashy sound.
Yeah, and Sunshine, Lollipops are more like, no, this is what the band sounded like in the rehearsal room. But we went back to Blood Guts and grabbed all of that artwork that people were so interested in, because Blood Guts is a very minimal album. It's like 13, 14 minutes long. It's got one photo that's iconic on the front of the naked women covered in blood with the dwarf. And then it's got one kind of iconic photo of us on the back, chaotic live shot. So we said, okay, what if we went back to these photographers, got the contact sheets, and went and started grabbing cool old shots of the band and cool old shots from the same Blood Guts session that nobody's ever seen. And a lot of people made the mistake with this Record Store Day record, Sunshine Lollipops, of saying, oh, it's a reissue of Blood Guts because it has a similar cover. But when you actually pull it out, it's not a reissue. It's a totally different record. It's a picture disc, and it's got like 5 different shots from that Blood Guts sequence that you've never seen and some live stuff. And so it's very... I'm very proud of it. I mean, it's and they sold immediately. I mean, they went out, there's a couple thousand of them and they're all sold. So now we're going to, unleash a few on our website, and those will all be gone in a day or two. And that's it. The picture disc will never happen again. We'll make a different version of it. That's not a picture disc, and it'll have different stuff in it. But yeah, it was just sort of, that was how that one went.
That's fucking awesome. And I'm going to need a copy, by the way, because I missed Record Store Day this year. So please save one for me. And I guess I think
eyes peeled to the site probably tomorrow, right? It's going to be boom.
Thedwarves.com, folks. Check it out.
Go check it out.
Blag, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to be with us, folks. 40-year and ongoing member of the live music industry. This is why we do what we do. This is where the love came from. This man sitting next to me right here, even though he's a few thousand miles away. Blag, thank you. So any parting words you'd like to leave us with?
Hey, I appreciate you talking to me, Steiner. Thanks for carrying the banner of the Dwarves. We love you, and, just send us a link.
I carry it proudly, and I look forward to seeing you when you come through to Reggie's again.
You got it, buddy.
Well, folks, this has been another episode of Secondhand Talent, and we will see you next Wednesday. And that's the podcast. There we go.